Today's daf. Today's daf is daf Chaf, and we're up to Omerle Abaye, which you'll see approximately. Let's see how many lines down from the top. I've had 8, 9 lines down from the top. The first word in the line is Abaye. Omerle Abaye. Now here's Abaye talking to Rava, and Rava, as we saw yesterday on daf Yutesam and Beis, understood that Rabbi Eliezer was Mekil B'Ktana, assuming that Stama L'Sichuch. What that means is that if you have a small mat, then the assumption is that it's not comfortable as a bed for reclining, and therefore it doesn't have the status of a Kli, it's not Makabel Tumah, and therefore we assume it's for Sichuch. And in case of Stama, Rabbi Eliezer is Mekil, and he says that Stama, in the case of a Ketana, is l'sichuch, and therefore you could use this small mat as schach. The Tanakama, on the other hand, was namachmir in the case of a ketana, and he assumed that even though it's a ketana, nevertheless it's stama l'shchiva. Unless he designates it for schach, we assume that it's for reclining purposes. It's a kli, it's makabel tumah, and therefore it's invalid for schach. As far as the gedola is concerned, the long mat, everybody agrees that it's so long that he might as well use it as schach. And unless he designates it otherwise for the purpose of reclining, then we could use it as schach. But in the case of a ketana, Rava had it that Rabbi Eliezer is mekil in a ketana, and the Tanakam was machmir in a ketana. And Abaye is not going to be happy with that. Amalei Abaye, hachi, if you are correct, Rava, then the language of Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah is not precise. And why is that so? Because Rabbi Eliezer Omer, it says achas ketana, the achas gedola. Now, if you notice, the word ketana comes first and gedola second. That's not the way it should be, according to you, Rava. It should say achas gedola, the achas ketana be boiling, which means that if, according to you, Rava, Rabbi Eliezer is a mekil in the case of a ketana, what he's doing is he's comparing a ketana to a gedola. So he should have said achas gedola. Not only in the case of a gedola is it stama l'sichuch, it's kosher for schach, but the achas ketana. But even a ketana has the same halacha as a gedola. And what that means is that the method of the Mishnah is that the melamed comes first and the nilmad comes second. In other words, when you're equating bet to aleph, aleph is your paradigm case, and bet is going to be your derived case. You're going to equate bet with aleph. And in this context, you're going to equate a ketana with a gedola. Because again, in the case of a gedola, everybody agrees that stama l'sichuch, that it's kosher for schach. The chiddush of Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rava's version, is that even a ketana has the same halacha as a gedola, and it's stama l'schach, it's kosher for schach. So then he should have started with the word gedola and then gone on to the word ketana, v'od, and furthermore asks Abaye, I'm going to prove to you from a brisa that the machlokas is not about the ketana, the way Rava said it, but rather it's about a gedola. And not only that, I'm going to prove to you from a brisa that Rabbi Eliezer is not the mekil, but on the contrary, he's the machni. The machlokas is not going to be as you presented it, Rava, in the case of a ketana, but rather in the case of a gedola. And not only that, Rabbi Eliezer l'chumra, he's the one who's going to say that b'stama it's not kosher for. He is the machni. Isani, we learned in the brisa, machzeles hakonim, a mat that's made of these reeds. Big gedola, if it's a large mat, misachkin ba. According to the Tanakama, we assume that since it's very large, he might as well use it for schach. If we don't know otherwise, if he hasn't explicitly designated it for reclining, then stama, it's schach. Rabbi Eliezer over here's the machmir in Eina Mekabelas Tuma, Besachim. It means if he designates it as schach explicitly, he makes a verbal declaration, this mat, this very large mat, is for the purpose of schach, then misachim. But lo yichta, meaning if he didn't designate it, then mistama, we assume that it's for sleeping purposes, and therefore it's makabel to when it's possible schach. So we see that the machlokas here in the brisa between the Tanakam and Rabbi Eliezer is about a machzeles gedola, a large mat, in a case of stama, and dafka the other way around, it's Rabbi Eliezer who's the machmer. So there are two strikes against Rava based on this brisa. Number one, we see that there's a machlokas in a gedola, whereas according to Rava and his transmission, there was never a machlokas in gedola. And secondly, moreover, it's Rabbi Eliezer who's the machmir, not as Rava would have it that Rabbi Eliezer is the makir. Elam Rav Papa, therefore, in the light of this brisa, Rav Papa summarizes the pshat that we now have in our Mishnah here in Sukkah Daf Yutes. B'ketana kuli amalo pligi. There was never a machlokas about a ketana, since it's very comfortable to use as a bed. Stama l'shchiva. If he doesn't designate it as chach, we assume, in the lack of any evidence to the contrary, that he wants it for shchiva, and therefore it's a kli, and it's completely disqualified as chach. Kli b'gdola. But in the case of gdola, Tanakama savar gdola l'sichuk. Since it's very large and very long, why waste it for reclining purposes? Use it for a schach. And it's only in a case where he said explicitly that it's for shchiva, for reclining, then it becomes a bed, it becomes a kli, and it's possible as schach. But in any event, we see the Tanakh is the mekil. And says Rav Papa, Rabbi Eliezer Savar, he is going to be the machmir. Stam gedola nami l'shchiva. Even if you have a long machzeles, which is a little bit less comfortable and sort of like a waste to use such a long mat for sleeping purposes, and nevertheless, we assume he wants it for shchiva because that's the whole year round. He's going to gain a hammock the whole year round. Why waste it on 7 days of chag? Now we go back to the language of Rabbi Eliezer now Mishnah. He says, here's how we interpret it. Stam asiyasa nami l'shtiva. That if he produces, he manufactures a machzeles, then we assume it's l'shchiva. And that means that the Gdola has the same status as a Ketana, and in both cases, Rabbi Eliezer assumes, unless we know otherwise, and he designated explicitly for schach, we assume that he wants it for shchiva, as we said, to use it for the whole year. We learned in the Bryce, machzeles shel shifa. Shifa, he says here, is a min gemi. Gemi are those kinds of very soft reeds that grow in a marshland, in water. And shifa is one particular type of gemi. Vishal gemi means all of these, water lilies kind of thing, and they're very soft. And he didn't designate it for any particular purpose. He never said explicitly what he wanted for. The Brisa says, Gedola misachim ba, in the case of a long machzeles, we're going to pass it like the Chachamim that we saw earlier, that if we don't know anything to the contrary, we assume he wants it for schach, and we could be making Tana, but if it's a smaller one, ein misachim. Why not? Why can't you use a small machzeles of shifa or gemi for schach? Why do we assume that he wants it for shchiva purposes, and therefore it's possible to schach? And the answer is because it's very soft, and a person doesn't want to sleep on a very hard mattress. I mean, when I was in the army, that's what we did. That's general rule. That's not what you want to do. You want to sleep on a very soft, mattress. And therefore, this is a very soft kind of, it grows near the water. And it's very soft. However, there is a situation in which these very materials become unusable, if I could use that term. In other words, it's not something that's really fit for sleeping. They become very hard, like a plank. And what's that? Shalkanim v'shalchilos Gidola. When you have something that grows on the water, however, what they do is, now I read it as Gidola. I only said it that way in order to trip you, to see if you're on your toes. But really, you shouldn't read that word as Gidola. You should read it as Gidula. And the shoresh, the root of that word is gadel, a gdil. What's a gdil? Like, for example, you may remember that the Torah calls tzitzis gedilim, right? Al gedilim. Gedilim are woven, or maybe the better word would be braided. I like that word, braided. They're braided. And once they become braided, they become very tough. And it's very tough, very hard. It's not like the soft original shifa or gemi, which is perfect for sleeping purpose, like a soft mattress. Now it becomes very tough, very hard. Because when they braid it, it's very tightly braided. And as a result, it's called gidula. Gidula, it's from the word gidil, gidula. It's gidula is the adjective that describes the noun gidil. And misachnim, because it's so tough, it's like hard, then you wouldn't want to sleep on such a hard mattress. And therefore, we can assume, unless we know otherwise, that he would like to use it for Succah. So, it's a memory device, but it's kind of counterintuitive that the harder it is, the more kosher it is for Succah, because it becomes less appropriate for sleeping as a machzelas l'shchiva. And he says aruga. However, if it's a case of an aruga, it's not really braided tightly, it's just sort of woven and loose in a loose connection, then it still remains soft. And ein mitzachim, unless we know otherwise, he would designate it and use it for shchiva, for reclining purposes. It's very comfortable because it's aruga and it's not clear, it's not gedula. And if it's aruga, then it still remains somewhat relatively soft and it's perfect for sleeping. Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi, Omishim of it, here's the dissenting view. Achasu v'achasu misachnim bo. So we have now a lineup of two great Tanoim who are Mekil, and they assume that if you have this machzelas and it's ketana, it's relatively small, and therefore it could be very appropriate for reclining. And not only that, it's also braided. Nevertheless, mesachechim, but unless he designates it explicitly, verbally, for shchiva purposes, we assume that he wants it for Sukkah. Okay. Now we're about to embark upon a sugya that deals with what's called tumas measures. What is tumas measures? In general, when we talk about categories of tuma, we can talk about mess, for example, a corpse, which is called an aviyavos hatum. It's mitame adam v'kelim. If, let's say, adam or kelim come in direct contact with the corpse, they become an avatuma, which means they're tummy for 7 days. That's very unusual. So let's say if a person touches a mess and he becomes an avatuma, then if he comes in contact now with another person or with kelim, then they become what's called a rishon tumah, which is only a tumah's error. It's just 1 day until nightfall. And they themselves, as a rishon tumah, cannot convey tumah because only an ava tumah or a rishon tumah can convey tumah. But in any event, we go on to a zav. This is the main discussion for today. A zav is, of course, an ava tumah, and he has re'ios consecutively that are clearly not normal, that out of the getter of health. And he has a new category, and that's called tumas medjus. What's tumas medjus? Mem dalid reish sama. If he sleeps or leans or rides or reclines, and he's a zav, on anything that is designated for that purpose, like a chair, a couch, a bed, then that couch or bed that he reclines on becomes not a rishon l'tumah, but rather it becomes an avatuma. it gets the same exact status as the Zav himself. And just to reiterate what we've said in the past many times, but it always pays to review it, with regard to kliates, wooden utensils, if they have a receptacle, yeshlan base kibul, that's called a kli, and then it becomes susceptible to tumah. However, that's only regular tumah. That's not tumas medrus. Right? Tumas medrus would only apply if, let's say, you had a wooden bed and it was designated as such as a bed for shkiva. Then, even though it doesn't have a base kibul, it's a flat bed. Nevertheless, as far as tumas medrus is concerned, it has the status of kabbalah's tumah. Okay, we'll see. We'll go over some of these laws as we see it inside. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background. It's not in Hassan. This is a Mishnah in the third parak of Edios. Kol hachotzolos, everything that fits under chotzolos, the Gemara is going to ask what is chotzolos, has the status of a kli, and therefore mitamim tabimes. They will become an avatuma if there was direct contact, which is called maga, between a corpse and this chotzolos. However, they do not become an avatuma from a zav midin medrus. So medrus zav does not apply to chotzolos, but tumas mes, which means if there was direct contact between this kli, this utensil called chotzolos, and the dead and the corpse, then it becomes, the chotzolos becomes an avatuma. That's the opinion of Rebbe Dosa. Achamim omrim, they want to go a step further. They describe and categorize chotzolos as a bed. It means it's designated for reclining for shkiva, and therefore they become an avatuma through medrus zav. So we have machlokas here, just to summarize, between Rabbi Dosa and the Chachamim in a case of a zav who reclines on something called chotzolos, where Rabbi Dosa would say there's no tumah, and Chachamim would say it becomes tumas medrus and an avatum. So now the Gemara is going to be medayek from the language of this Mishnah in Edens. Midras in Tamimes Lo. It would seem that when the Chachamim said regarding a chotzolos, that they are susceptible to Kabbalah's tumas medrus, we assume that that means medrus and only medrus, to the exclusion of tamei mes. And they cannot be makabel tumas mes. Now that makes no sense. We never found anything that's subject to tumas medrus, because it's a kli for reclining purposes, and it's not subject to be makabel tumas mes. If it's a kli,
what is tumas midras again?
Midras is when a zav reclines on a bed. That bed becomes an avatum. That's called midras. Mem daled reish sam.
But not too much made, which is.
But if, let's say, the same bed, which is called a chotzelos, is in an oil together with a corpse, it does not contract too much mes. Can't be. But Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Nida, except in Nida, Kol HaMetami Medras, anything that is considered a clear bed for Tumas Medras and becomes an Avatuma, is by definition, therefore, it's Metami Tumas Mes. It becomes an Avatuma if it has direct contact with the corpse. And the reason for that is because it's a Kli. Amos says the Gemara, you have to rewrite the text over here and add one word. Ach Midras. The Chacham are adding to Rabbi Dosa. Rabbi Dosa was the one who said that in the case of a chotzolos is metabim tomi mes and not medrus. And now the Chacham say ach medrus. So the status of chotzolos is either that of a regular kli, and it contracts tumas mes, it becomes an avatuma if it's in the same oil as a mes. Or it's not just a kli in the generic sense. It has the status of shiva, of a bed. And therefore, not only is it makabel tumas mes if it's in the same oil as mes, it's makabel tumas medrus if a zav would sleep on this chotzolos, my chotzolos. Omer Avdimi Bar Hamduri. Bar Zovli. Oh, great. I'm really dancing out of joy. This is Mamish Ivdu Hashem B'Simcha. Because I didn't know what Chotzalos is, but now I know what Mar Zovli is. Gemara says, Mar Zovli. Amar Rabbi Abba, Mizable. Oh, now I understand. What's Mizable? Mizable, it's what's called in modern Hebrew a tarmil. Tarmil is what we call a bag. It's like what the women buy, leather bags. You could be, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, leather bags. Well, it's similar to a backpack because this is a leather bag that's not worn by ladies. It's worn by shepherds. And the shepherds, when they go to sleep at night, they take this leather bag and they use it as a pillow. So now the question is, what's the status of chotzalos? We begin to understand the question as to whether or not subject to tumas midras. Is it a bed or a pillow? Well, yes and no. I mean, it's not really, its primary function is not for a pillow, but the shepherds use it at night for a pillow. Now, shepherds are not meant to sleep, by the way. You don't pay a shepherd to fall asleep,
It's just a why the farm bringing this up. Well, Sukkah. And to Sukkah, it's like a bed.
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, all that we're learning now is going to have an impact on the Machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and Chacham, and our Mishnah in Sukkah. But we need another 5-10 minutes to get to that. Let me just make a bracha. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, Shim ben Lakish, he disagrees. He has another take on chotzalos. What is chotzalos? Machzalos mamash. It's not a leather bag that could be used as a pillow, but rather it's a mat. The Azda Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish l'ta'ameh, he's being very consistent. The Amar of Reish Lakish, Reini Kaparas Rabbi Chia one. This is just on the side. After a father or a mother or a Rebbe passes on for about a 12-month period, the Talmud will say, Hareini Kaparas Mishkal, which means like he accepts the kapara because his Rebbe after his death is now being judged, and he might be judged in for a certain time in that hot place, if you know what I mean. So the Talmud says, I'll take it upon myself. That's Hareini Kaparas Mishkal. Now, Reish Lakish is a Talmud of Rabbi Chia. I'm not sure why it says Ubanov. Apparently, Reish Lakish learned Torah even from the children of Rabbi Chia. They probably passed on to Reish Lakish after the death of their father some of the Torah of their father. And when they died, Reish Lakish felt that he had lost his Rebbe. So he said, Areni Kaparas Mishkov. And he says the following. Now, first, we're going to get a statement of Reish Lakish, and then we're going to see exactly what he heard from Reb Chia, his Rebbe. Betchila. Now, what's the word betchila? Betchila obviously means at the beginning, but it means when the Jews first came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and they stayed in Bavel for many, many years, centuries, until they finally started coming back in trickles to Eretz Yisrael. So these are the Olim. Hopefully they got to Tzudat Zahut and they landed in Israel. They came from where? From Bavel. And Kshenishtachat Torah Yisrael. And at this point, the Torah was being forgotten. Slowly. Not all of the Torah, but part of the Torah was being forgotten during this period. Whenever Jews have to run away and relocate, a lot of Torah goes down. Ola Ezra mi Bavel, the Yista. So the Jews had begun to pack out of Bavel. Again, it wasn't massive amount of Jews, but enough that it made an impact on the Torah Bavel, and the Torah Bavel went down. And as a result, when the Babylonian Jews started coming to Israel, they really were missing a chunk of Torah that was lost in the transition. Which word? No, so Ola Ezra Bavel. Now, Ezra is one of the Ole Bavel, but when he comes to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, the Yista means he established it in a way that it shouldn't be forgotten.
Oh,
He started teaching the masses. He had lectures. He taught over Zoom,
okay.
even when he was on vacation. All right. Chazav and Ishtak. Again, after the period of Ezra, we get into a period which is called the B'nai B'Seira. And this is a sugya Masechet Psachim on Daf Samach Vav. And there the Gemara Psachim tells us that the B'nai B'Seira, when they were the leaders and the teachers of Israel, they also forgot a lot of their Torah. And Ola Hillel, Habavli, V'yista. Now Hillel comes from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, where at the time of the B'nai B'Seira, the Torah was again going down, 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 and he gave it a new boost. However, Chazav and Ishtakla, even after the period of Hillel in Eretz Yisrael, the Torah was somehow spread and it got thinned out, and they didn't have enough yeshivas and so forth and so on. I think I once heard from my Rebbe that he said that the reason why the Yerushalmi is so unpopular, I mean, today it's coming back into vogue to some extent, but still, how many people really learn Yerushalmi? And not only that, he used to point out on Tisha B'Av, I remember, that if you look at the kiddush, there are very, very few kiddush that are coming from Eretz Yisrael. So there was a dearth of Torah in Eretz Yisrael. It's kind of shocking. We would think that Eretz Yisrael would be a higher level of Torah, but it wasn't. So all Reb Chia Ubana V'Yisdu, and now Reb Chia and his sons come from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and they instituted a new strength for the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. And this is a sugya Masechet Ksubas. I'm sure you're very, very familiar with the very famous Gemara. Rabbi Chia made a declaration, I'm going to guarantee that the Torah will not be forgotten from Israel. And he started collecting children. You remember this?
Oh.
And he taught them, each one learned one of the 5 Chumashim, he taught them, and then they would teach each other.
Yeah.
And the Gemara goes into great detail about how he took fish nets and how he made the fish nets and what he did with the fish. And it's a whole beautiful...
Deer, and he made,
excellent. The deer.
The wrote Sefer Torah.
On the deer. Everything had to be completely Mikducha B'Tara from the start. I mean, my father gave a lot of drushes on that Gemara. Anyway. So V'chein Omar Reb Chia Ubanav. So now we get to the punchline. So tell us, Reish Lakish, what did you hear from Rabbi Chia when he was miyaseh the Torah that would shed a light on the machlokes between Rabbi Dosa and the Chacham?